How's it going, everybody? This is Jeff In Control Robinson, and I want to talk to you guys real quick about the balance patch updates. We've had some other people give some thoughts as well. Jack Attack has put his thoughts out there. I will link that in the comments, as well as Cats. They've done an excellent job, and I feel like everyone should chime in because it's really cool stuff. I'm trying to think back to HOTS, and certainly not Wings of Liberty, but I think during HOTS there was some... there definitely was a beta period, I remember that. The Warhound, of course, who can forget that? But there wasn't quite as much interaction, and certainly not for as long as a period of time. Legacy of the Void will be coming out. I mean, there is no proposed date just yet, but I would imagine no earlier than November or December of this year. I believe it to be after that. And my speculation is based on the fact that we already know that BlizzCon will be played in Heart of the Swarm, and I can't imagine the beautiful and intelligent people of Blizzard making some silly mistake like releasing the new game before BlizzCon, because that would just kind of undercut the excitement of that. But enough about that speculation. Maybe they do that and I'm an idiot. Who knows? Let's talk about these balance patch updates, because Legacy of the Void, of course, has been out for a couple of weeks in closed beta. They've been releasing more and more, not keys, I guess, but they've been giving more and more people access to it. And we've seen that the game is obviously fairly imbalanced at this point in time. I know for me personally, I've reverted back to playing Heart of the Swarm. I've got Clan Wars to play and stuff like that, so that seems a little bit more interesting to me, as opposed to playing hours and hours and hours of an imbalanced closed beta game. I'm not concerned for the future. It's more just that, you know, I'm waiting for them to patch it, and then we'll get back into it, which is what I'll do shortly here. So the first thing they talk about is they have some comments on a new Terran unit, still not yet proposed in terms of name or gameplay, but some ideas are being thrown out on it. They're talking about high damage, low rate of fire, or low damage, high rate of fire, variable attack modes, high damage with low range, and low damage with high range, that kind of stuff, small radius area attack with high damage, and more. So they're thinking about a lot of different things in this. I think the earlier speculation from them as well is that it's looking to be either a factory or starport unit, which I think is interesting, because we've already got the Cyclone. We've already got kind of a mech emphasis going here, but they've already talked about as well potentially reverting back the upgrades for dual mech, air and ground, both armor and attack. So they're aware of the fact that right now mech is super strong, but not super strong in the sense that everyone's just going mech and they're winning everything. It's more like the Cyclone does too many things, and that's really powerful. We'll talk more about that in a second. But this is interesting. It kind of screams like Thor to me. Like the Thor has a very low attack rate but high damage. And then it did have anti-air capabilities, which it still does have, but they even reverted back. It had an alternate mode that was more specific to anti-air, and now they kind of took that away. So I don't know. I'm not going to go too deep on this, because in general I look at this and nothing like super... they're not really revealing like a new mutated biological unit that's a capital class ground, you know, like they're not getting too specific. They're talking about rates of fire, so I'll wait to see more on this. I'm not overwhelmed with excitement on this, and I don't think Terran players will necessarily be either. They're not abuzz. Other gameplay changes. The next one down is new Reaper grenade ability. They're talking about giving the Reaper the ability to have kind of a knockback grenade. They don't go into detail. I'm pretty sure I read this correctly. They do not go into detail about having it have what kind of attack. I think that's one of the more interesting places for me. And when I say what kind, I mean, is it high damage? Is it low damage? Is it better against light units? Is it better against heavy units? What's the range of it? All those things really determine what I feel about this, and they don't get into too terrible of a specific area with this. The idea of a knockback grenade is really cool to me, though. I will say that. A zoning thing for a harassed unit like a Reaper sounds really cool. Now, if I'm a Zerg player, I'm a little bit more worried about something like that, because that sounds extremely troublesome. Lings are, you know, the natural counter to Reapers in the early game. Of course, that changed a little bit with Legacy of the Void. The new economy means that the Reaper gets in at a much more hostile point in time. Speedlings are more abundant, multiple queens are more abundant, so they have a very different role, and that's why we're looking at gameplay changes like this being proposed, because otherwise they don't really do that much. We see them in PvT as well, but they come in kind of at a similar time, only I think even a little bit less. Like the soccer should be out, and the Mothership Core should be almost out as well at exactly the same time, and nobody's proxy Reapering or anything like that in that matchup. So it's a little bit more problematic. It's a worse world for the Reaper, and that's why they're talking about some of these changes. They've also always been interested in trying to make the Reaper a little bit more of a mid, possibly late game. Of course, we don't see it in the late game, but I'm sure Blizzard dreams of that being there at some point in time. With the knockback ability, give it those legs to be seen in the mid game. Like I said, it really depends on the range. If it can stay out of harm's way, if it's a fairly long-range grenade, and if it knockbacks simply everything, then there's a lot of utility there, of course, especially for a ranged army like Mech or Bio, quite frankly, that would benefit from keeping units out of their grill. It's a little bit redundant, of course, because the Hellbat does such a damn good job of saying, hey, if you want to come closer to me, that's great. I've got a cone of flame that will say something about that. So again, a lot of speculation here because they're being fairly vague on the specifics, but if it's a grenade that's particularly good against like medium or heavy units, that would be interesting because the Reaper is quite terrible at that. It dual pistol wields against light units just fine. If it's AoE damage, which I imagine it would be because we're talking about knockback here as well, in a grenade, I mean, it just wouldn't make a whole lot of sense that it's like a one specific guy grenade. It probably is AoE. Then there's a lot of potential there as well, and I could see it being something that's, again, too strong against Zerg, and they would probably have to make it into an upgrade or nerf it, and then again, the Reaper falls into that problem where it's like, well, now it's nerfed, now you're spending upgrades on something that is wishy-washy at best in the mid-game, so nobody will ever use it. It's tough, because I love the Reaper, I love the Adept, we'll talk more about that in a second, but again, it feels like StarCraft early game harass is walking such a fine line. It's either too damn good, in which case you got to get rid of it, or it is not good enough past the early game, and then you never see it again. I felt like the Reaper in HOTS in particular fell into a nice place in the TVZ matchup where it was paired up with Hellions, and because of its regen ability, had a really nice kind of a light tank ability. It was able to take on the damage from Zerglings and Queens, and give the Hellions a little bit more longevity. It fell into a really nice place there. It never had a place in TVP except for the 1 or 2 you saw in early game as a scout, and then the oddball guy would make like 9 of them and usually lose to a better player. So again, the Reaper's in kind of a tough spot. A big change here though, mineral amounts change from 100%/50% to 100%/60%. This is a fairly small change. It's just a little bit of mitigation that the bases are mining out really, really fast, which I personally really do like, and I'm a big fan of. I could see some people perhaps on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of skill being a little bit more uneasy with that because God, the game feels fast. It feels really, really fast. So this is a 10% nod in that direction of saying your base will last a little bit longer. I feel like this is a cool number in the sense that we are in closed beta, so you don't need to go, woo, huge swings. It doesn't mean they're like, well, you know what, we tried the economy, 10 people whined about it, we're out. No, it's just from 50% to 60%, not a big deal. I like that they're experimenting back and forth. There's a huge discussion, particularly on Team Liquid, about the economy changes, and some people have a real issue with it. I definitely recommend you head over there and read that if that seems interesting to you. Maybe I'll link it, maybe I won't, I'm not sure. I'm making this video completely live if you couldn't tell. I actually just got back from the gym, but I think I look pretty... No, never mind, not about me. Head over there and ask about it and read about that discussion if you want. I myself have not delved too terribly deeply in it because I'm actually really excited about the economy, and it's so damn early in the closed beta that I know that we're nowhere near its final form, so I'm just playing it right now as opposed to really actively getting involved in the criticism against it. Protoss got a change here as well. The warp in duration reverted to Heart of the Swarm. So what that means is, of course, you've noticed the Protoss units take forever to warp in, and they take 200% damage while being warped in. I like their choice to revert back the timing of the warp in as opposed to the damage. I do like that there is a risk to warping in. I felt like it was a little bit silly that a guy could be teleporting into a place in the middle of a battle in response to a drop or harass, and just there's no reason that's bad other than they're taking some damage and they can't deal it back while they warp in, but they warp in so quick that it's not really that big of a deal. With the warp in being reverted back, I don't have the exact time in my head, but we all know it's fairly quick. But they do take 200% damage. That does mean if if I get dropped by 8 Marines and they stem, I can't just warp in 7 Zealots on that spot and be like, okay, that drop's done with, I'm going to go over here and deal with other things. Because if you do that in Legacy of the Void, even with this revert back in time, those Marines will gun down those Zealots in no time at all, and you'll have nothing there to defend that dropship. So you have to make the smarter choice of warping them safely away, and a lot of times, again, against a better opponent, even outside their vision, because if they're dropped on the ground and they see you warping in Zealots 3 inches away on the monitor, they stem, run over there, mow down them, and continue on their merry way, killing your base. So again, it's kind of a part of that theme of StarCraft II Legacy of the Void that I really do like, and that is rewarding better decisions, having some risk and having some reward to those decisions. A lot of times a game, if it does a lot of the work for you, or if it doesn't make your hasty decisions punishable, then the game's kind of soft in the sense that you can make a lot of mistakes and still win. And that certainly is always going to be true. You can make a lot of mistakes and still win, but at the higher level, it's going to be less true, and I feel like this game is being catered in that direction, and I really appreciate it. So I'm a big fan of this. Something did need to be done, and everyone's like, oh, you're Protoss in control, of course you think something needed to be done. While I am Protoss, and I did think something needed to be done, I like to believe I can detach myself from... Like, let's just face it, guys. Yeah, I want Protoss to be better, but I don't want it to be the best. And I'm not competing anymore, so I don't really have any reason to want Protoss to be broken. Pretty sensible anyways. The next change down below is Adept. The Adept's weapon damage point changed from 0.4 to 0.167. I'm going to be honest with you, I have no idea what that means. I imagine it means it does more damage, or it does it faster. I'm just not good with numbers, but this is in general a slight buff to the Adept. Is this going to make it super playable, and are we going to see it in the mid and late game? Is it going to be terrorizing the dreams of Terran and Zerg? No, I don't think so. I think it still has that same Reaper issue that we saw from earlier, where it is a good light harass unit. If you give it the upgrade in mid-game, it can kind of deal with Marines, but no better and no worse than everything else can. And I say this, and I recognize that I'm not asking for the Adept to get a 500% increase in buff, because then it would be broken and stupid. It can't be nerfed, obviously, because it's already used so on such a limited basis. So it's such a tough spot, and I do not envy the job of David Kim and those guys who are trying to make the Adept and Reaper something cool. I love the model design. I've said that before. I love the idea of it. In early game harass, it's okay. But Terrans and Zergs and even Protoss are not thinking of it Adepts. They're not. They're not like, gosh, I really need to Chrono Boost out 2 Stalkers. Otherwise, 3 Adepts are going to show up and tear me a new one. Nope. They're like, oh wow, you made Adepts. Okay. I will defend them naturally because I already have a Stalker out in my Mothership Core, and it just doesn't do that much. I've had a couple games where they're cool. My opponent's, done early gateways and delayed his Warp Gate upgrade just to get out two Adepts and then 2 more really quickly. On medium to small sized maps, they can get there at such time that they will kill 5 or 6 Harvesters. But you'll notice again, 5 or 6 Harvesters for their cost and the economic sacrifices you made, like delaying your own Mothership Core, your own Warp Gate, Chrono Boosting the gateways. It about balances out, and that's with good micro. So the risk is more on the Adept side as opposed to the other guy's side. And I don't have super stellar micro, and I defend them quite easily. So they're tough. They really are tough. Light harassed units in the early game. I know what they're chasing the dream. They're going after the Vulture. They're like, Vulture, what were you? You were great in early game, you laid mines in mid and late game, and you actually were still able to kill Zealots and other things in the early and mid game, or just in all phases of the game, essentially. Short of them literally bringing back the Vulture, I don't know how you get back to that. And the Vulture was an anomaly. It was such a freaking cool unit. Such a cool unit. And I'll tell you what, in single-player StarCraft 2 and even the mods, it's just not the same in StarCraft 2. I don't know if the engine's too good or what, but it just did not ever feel as cool as it did in Brood War. It was one of the coolest things real-time strategy has ever seen. We missed you, Vulture. We really do. People are like, you play Protoss. Yeah, I still miss it. It was cool. Cyclone change. Can no longer target air. New upgrade allows Cyclones to target air. It's a fusion core requirement. That's pretty far down the line. Research from Factory Tech, and it's 100 cost. Things like upgrade nerfs are really up my alley. I'm a big fan of them because, again, going back to the conversation we had earlier where it rewards smart decision making, but it also gives risk reward. If you get this upgrade and then the other guy is not making air units, well, that's kind of silly. So I'm looking at the PvT matchup and I'm thinking a lot of Cyclones won't get that upgrade, maybe until later in the game, but that's when the Protoss has access to more abilities to kind of deal with the Cyclone, and the Mothership Core can kind of peck away at them in the early game. So people are like, well, now I can't make the Cyclone. No, you can make the Cyclone. It's just you have to make other units too. Wow. Shoot. And I wanted this to just be a spammable singular unit that could win me all the games. Said nobody ever except for the dirty, dirty poop heads. Like, this is fine. This is great. It shouldn't have the ability to clear up all the overlords in the early game of a TVZ while dominating slow lings. It'll still dominate slow lings, but it won't dominate the entire early game until speedlings come out. That is absolutely ridiculous. The Mothership Core should be an answer to the Cyclone. It does such little damage that the Cyclone is like, it's more concerned with the damage over time as opposed to like, oh god, I got hit twice by a Mothership Core, now this Cyclone is completely useless because it's got 2 health. It's just, this makes sense. And a cheap upgrade at that, by the way, it's more that it's further down the tech line and it's going to make it a little bit more difficult for them to rush to this upgrade. Super difficult, actually, I would go as far as to say. So, big fan of this change. I think it's an absolute step in the right direction. I believe Terran players should be okay with this as well. The Cyclone was also stupidly dominating TVT, where it was like, you know, if I made Cyclones and you didn't, good game. Now it'll still be Cyclone versus Cyclone, but it's going to be a little bit further down the road, which opens up options in the early mid-game. I'm not saying this is a cure, but I am saying this is a step in the right direction, and I like that they're testing what this will do. The Ravager. This is probably the biggest change of the patch. Weapon period change from 0.8 to 1.6. That is obviously... Well, oh god, I'm about to do math on camera. Anyways, that's a huge slowdown. It gets dramatically slower. Weapon range reduced from 6 to 4. That's again a dramatic drop in range as well. That means that it can no longer outrange cannons and stack defenses like bunkers, so they do still serve an early game purpose. Of course, if you show up with 6 Ravagers, the fact that they're in range of that photon cannon doesn't mean, well, it's not like, well, now I can't rush. The cannon will single-handedly hold off the attack. No, it doesn't mean that, but it does mean if I'm like, oh god, he's making Ravagers, I need to make 5 cannons because I don't have access to anything else, that'll actually kind of do something, as opposed to literally nothing. If they sit back and just outrange it, I just die for free. So it changes up the early game, and beyond the stack defense, of course, they're just quite a bit less effective. The cooldown time is dramatically increased, and their range is dramatically increased. They're more in harm's way, they're dealing out less damage. This is a big nerf. Katz in his comments kind of went as far as to say that this makes them... I'm not going to quote him because I can't remember. I just read his comments. Something along the lines of invalid, essentially, in the early game because they're 1 less armor, they're more expensive, and they don't fulfill their role quite as well. I think that's a little hyperbolic. I think they still do serve a purpose. The zoning power of their AoE is very powerful. Their ability to hit air is also very powerful. They're still kind of a catch-all unit. Are you just going to make 30 Ravagers and steamroll a Protoss that can't make Colossus and their stack defenses don't count? No, probably not. It's going to make the early game a little bit more complicated than that. And I think that opens up options for the Protoss, which in particular is good for Protoss. Don't get me wrong, this is an absolute buff to Terran and Protoss. Of course, a nerf to Zerg is a buff to them. Is it too much? Maybe on the cooldown, maybe on the range. Katz said either one of these would have been fine, but both is too much. I don't know that I disagree with that. I think that could be true. Of course, we'll have to play it out and see how it functions. We'll see if the Ravager disappears altogether. I don't think it will, but maybe, maybe they just go back to roaches. So, post your thoughts on this one. This one's a little bit interesting. This is a huge nerf. It's a gigantic nerf. Did the Ravager need this big of a nerf? It might have. It absolutely dominated ZVZ and ZVP in particular, and of course it had a place in ZVT. As a Protoss player, I can tell you that it controlled the meta of ZVP. The decisions you made, like I have to open up Stargate because I need a couple of Void Rays, otherwise Ravagers will run me over, is very real. Rushing out to Disruptors was something that people did, but without a Warp Prism, them by themselves just die, and the Protoss dies with it. With a Warp Prism, they can hit you with that shot. Of course, it's a skill shot, so the Corrosive Bile, so it's not like it's the easiest thing in the world, but if they do, they win. No question about it. There's no world where you are holding off a Ravager rush with Disruptors that if you lose the Disruptor or lose the Warp Prism with the Disruptor, that you win after that. It would be an amazing... There has to be something else incredible going on, like they skipped Overseers, and you have 9 DTs killing the army and their bases. Maybe. Swarmos change. Cost change to 200, 100. 3 supply. No longer requires an upgrade for flying Locusts. And they're enabled from the start. Locust health down from 65 to 50. Swarmhost can burrow move at 2 speed. I think these are great changes. I really like this. This is overall a buff. The only nerf here we see is Locust health is down from 65 to 50. I think that's pretty damn fair. Locusts were already insanely powerful, especially in this world where Colossus in particular are not nearly as abundant because of their nerfs. What would be interesting with this is if they did end up giving the buffs back to the Colossus, because then this could perhaps be too much of a nerf to Swarmos. We'll have to see. But they like Swarmos. I mean, with these changes, I'm like, gosh, they really want them to be out there. They can now move below ground, which is cool. They weren't able to do that before, so that makes them a little bit more mobile. They were able to launch their Locust above ground, I guess, so that's something. And they just have the Flying Locust from the very beginning. The Flying Locusts are pretty powerful. Not super broken powerful like I was worried about before. We'll have to still wait and see with maps. I think that's where the real balance will occur. People are always going to have to take into account that if a Zerg is within Flying Locust range of another base, that's just too much, because there's nothing short of having your entire army parked at the base that you can do with them traversing over land and sea and air. They become flying. So I don't have super strong thoughts on this one, other than this seems like a mixed bag of nerf and buff. I'm going to be honest, like I'm more selfishly slightly annoyed that they're just making changes to Swarmhost. It's like, focus on the Lurker, let it have a similar role, and let's just quietly dismiss the Swarmhost. It's had such a bad place in StarCraft 2. Not Warhound level, the Warhound was stupid broken, but the Swarmhost is just boring, and automatic sieging is just not interesting or fun. I don't know. I don't have much of a defense for it. Not going to make this video into a bitch and moan about Swarmhost, though, other than what I already just did. So that's it. That's the changes they proposed. I myself will be playing and practicing it this week just to kind of see what change, to get my hands on it. I have not played it yet, by the way, while making this video, so if that invalidates all my opinions, it's too late. You've already watched it all. But I understand your sentiments. I will be making more videos as the changes come out, guys. As always, just go ahead and feel free to consider subscribing to the YouTube. It's been, slow rolling with the content, but anytime my eye catches something that I want to talk about, I've been doing it. So far, it's only been vlogs, but in the near future, I'll be... Well, anyways, this is not the update place. Thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I'll try to interact with the interesting and constructive criticisms or, interesting thoughts. You guys have a great day.